Kylian Mbappe je velika tema u svetu fudbala u prethodnih nekoliko nedelja, a možda je Jonathan Johnson jedna od najboljih osoba sa kojom može da se priča o tome, s obzirom da ga je i intervjuisao, da živi u Parizu, da pomno prati i fudbal i Paris Saint-Germain. To je osnova ovog razgovora, međutim ima još 2 ili 3 dobre teme o kojima se može pričati sa njim. Jonathan Johnson je dopisnik CBS-a za Evropu. Jonathan, many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Are you the guy who has received the most interview requests in past 10 days regarding Kylian Mbappe?
You know what? It's a really good question. I have received many interview requests, and unfortunately, as the timing happens sometimes with these things, the actual breaking news caught me off guard. I was unavailable for a few days. So the good news for you is I had to say no to most of the interview requests. So this is something of a semi-exclusive.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. You are in Paris. Why I ask this question is that I know that you are one of the rare person that interviewed Mbappe one-on-one, right?
Yep, that's correct. A couple of years ago, just after he extended his contract with PSG.
Tell me, what is your experience with interviewing Kylian Mbappe? How did you approach the interview? How he behaved? What do you feel about it? What is your impression right now about that?
I mean, obviously, when you get to speak to a top-level athlete, especially for me as a football specialist, a top-level footballer, I mean, arguably the biggest name in world football and, in my opinion, the best player as well. You know, it's a huge honor. And it's a massive highlight of my career to date. You know, the memories that I have from that interview are, you know, of a player, a person who is very genuine, you know, had a lot of time for the media that day, went into great detail with his answers. And to be honest, there's a lot of footballers out there today who, when you ask them a question, they'll give you maybe an answer of 10, 20 seconds, not really go into too much detail. You kind of feel like it's an automatic kind of robotic response. But my entire interview with Mbappe was done in English. Very, very impressive. You know, and he just comes across as a very, very mature young man and somebody who's really got his feet on the ground. So, you know, I think those are the main things that I remember from the interview, or that I will choose to remember in the future from that interview as it becomes further and further in the past.
Did you have an impression that at that point he already had a plan for the future, or that it was year to year?
Kylian Mbappe and his entourage have had a plan for his career from almost the very beginning. There's never really been a moment of his career where he doesn't know what the roadmap looks like from that point until the end of his career. He knows what he wants. His entourage know what he wants, but they also know what they want as well. You know, and I think every single thing that happens between now and the end of his career, you know, will have been pre-prepared in advance. You know, and the execution of their kind of game plan for how they want these things to play out. You know, I think we can expect it to be of absolutely top quality. So, you know, when we're talking about all these big, important moments, like the decision to leave PSG to join Real Madrid, the possibility of playing for France at the Olympics as well as the Euros, all of this is stuff that had been pre-planned by Kylian Mbappe and by his entourage, so those close to him, you know, months, even years in advance. You know, to be honest, all of us in Paris have known it's not a question of if Kylian Mbappe joins Real Madrid, it's a question of when. And obviously we're getting closer to that moment now, but there's always been an inevitability that Mbappe would leave PSG for Real. I think the thing that surprised most people is that we are coming up now on 7 years of Kylian Mbappe in Paris. And many people at the very beginning didn't think that he would be a PSG player for that long. So in many regards, you could say that he's already pushed back some of his plans and the plans that he and his entourage have made together in order to spend a bit more time at PSG than first thought.
Were you surprised about the timing of the news and announcement?
To be honest, I think one thing that we should clarify at this moment in time is that although we are aware that Kylian Mbappe has made a decision on his future, PSG haven't communicated on that. Neither have Real Madrid. So at the moment, there are certain things that still need to be agreed, discussed, agreed again. But we know that we're now moving, towards that moment where the news will become official from one club or both clubs. And to be honest, in terms of the timing, I wasn't entirely surprised. I was absolutely certain it wouldn't happen during the January transfer window. The only thing that actually I was surprised about was that Kylian Mbappe didn't wait until after the second leg against Real Sociedad in Champions League, because I think at this moment in time, PSG are looking good in terms of the league, but also the Coupe de France and the Champions League. And with that in mind, I think the potential to upset the momentum, the chemistry in the team by making a big announcement, was quite high. So I was surprised that the timing of the news came out between the first leg against Sociedad and the second leg. But I'm not surprised at the way that PSG and Mbappe have tried to keep a lid on the story. And obviously, there's been no public comment about that just yet.
Has anyone asked that question to any of the sides, Kylian's side, PSG side, or Real Madrid, or anyone else who is close to the topic?
I mean, obviously, sort of being based in Paris, the easiest opportunity to potentially put a question to PSG is during the press conferences with Luis Enrique. And although he hasn't come out and explicitly said, yes, the decision has been made, Kylian Mbappe is leaving us, you just look at his comments after the match in the draw against Rennes over the weekend, where he said at some point, sooner or later, this team will have to learn to play without Kylian Mbappe. It's basically confirming without saying explicitly that, this is what's happening.
You mentioned that game, the recent game, which was decided in the final seconds of the game. And what I've heard is that audience and public and fans whistled Kylian Mbappe. Is that true? And how do you feel about it?
There was whistling when Kylian Mbappe was substituted. Some people have said that it was directed towards Mbappe. Some people have said it was directed towards Luis Enrique for substituting him. In any case, it was not a widespread booing and whistling. It was sort of more small areas of the stadium. But yes, I can confirm that it did happen. I was at the game. And I think in many ways, the frustration at that point was understandable. PSG had not played a particularly good game. I should add, it was very difficult conditions, very rainy, very cold, and very difficult to control the ball. But PSG were losing to a fantastic individual goal by Amine Gouiri from Rennes. And at that moment, it didn't really look like PSG were going to be able to get back in the game. So I think there was a lot of frustration towards PSG's performance, but frustration towards Mbappe for the timing of sort of his decision being made public knowledge, but also frustration that Luis Enrique hadn't worked out the changes in order to salvage something from the match. Obviously, we know that PSG went on to draw the game. We saw Kylian Mbappe celebrating on the touchline when Gonzalo Ramos scored that late penalty. But it's been a strange couple of weeks when you look at the dynamic between PSG and Mbappe, because Mbappe picked up that injury in the Coupe de France against Brest. He then had to be rested in the league, played in the Champions League, but was then on the bench in Ligue 1. So he's playing less of an important role for the team in the last couple of weeks, partly because of his physical condition, because PSG have to be careful that he doesn't injure himself, obviously, but also now because Luis Enrique has confirmed it publicly, partly because PSG are preparing for life without Mbappe as well.
How the news were perceived in Paris, in France, not only among the football fans, but please correct me if I'm wrong, the Kylian Mbappe is more than a football player in France. He is like a social icon. He's even sometimes, I feel, economically important to the France, and maybe even politically, especially in the year of the Olympic Games. So can you clarify for us how do you feel and see those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important to note as well, we're recording this interview on a Tuesday. Kylian Mbappe actually has a very high level, high profile dinner with the president of France and the Emir of Qatar coming up this week. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out given his decision. But like you said, Kylian Mbappe is hugely important. He's not just a football player, he's a brand. But more than that, he's also a symbol, a figurehead for France and the hope for the French youth. And obviously, it's going to be hugely disappointing to a lot of people in France that he's leaving. I don't think they'll be disappointed in Mbappe personally because they'll understand that he wants to try something new in his career to develop himself further. So there'll be sort of encouragement towards him doing that, but also maybe a sense of frustration that he doesn't stay around for maybe 1 or 2 more years. Obviously, Mbappe leaving at this moment in time, Ligue 1 is in a complicated situation regarding its TV rights deal. It's currently negotiating not only the domestic, but the international rights as well. And obviously, when you take Mbappe out of that equation, it complicates things in many ways. It also simplifies them as well for the league to move forward in the next couple of years, knowing Mbappe won't be there. But in an economic sense, it could make things a little bit more tricky for French football and for France in general. But I think as well, and I'm sure that it's something that the President Macron will acknowledge when he dines with Kylian Mbappe this week, and that's that Mbappe already made a sacrifice, not just for PSG, but also for France to stay a couple more years to enable the domestic game to continue to develop a little bit more. So I think overall the feeling will be one of slight sadness and frustration, but there'll also be a lot of gratitude towards Mbappe because, like I said at the beginning, he stayed longer than many people expected him to, really.
You mentioned that he will attend the dinner with President Macron and Emir of Qatar, right? They both, as far as it was possible to find out in the media, they both were involved in the previous 2 negotiations, if I'm correct. Can you tell me, is there any chance? You understand?
I do understand. Is there any chance that we could see history repeat itself? I mean, I'd be foolish to say that there is absolutely zero chance, but equally at the same time, I think it's the kind of tactic that you can only employ once in this kind of scenario. I find it very difficult to imagine that Mbappe will do the same, U-turn in his decision. I think the moment is right for both Mbappe and PSG to separate, and personally as well, I think it's the right moment for the league as well to move out of relying on one single figure. But equally, when you have 3 extremely powerful people in the same room dining together, you can never completely rule out these things because at this moment in time, as far as we know, there hasn't been an official announcement from Real Madrid to say everything has been signed, completely agreed upon. So until that actually happens, there is always going to be a little percentage of doubt.
What would you ask Mbappe now if you have a chance to do an interview? Can you give me 2 or 3 questions you would ask him right now?
I think if I was to ask him anything right this minute, I would ask him sort of why he felt now was the right time to leave France and to leave PSG. If he really truly feels that he's achieved everything that he can with PSG. Obviously, we know that there's still an opportunity for PSG to win Ligue 1, the Coupe de France, and the Champions League between now and the end of the season. Okay, we know that it's going to be difficult for PSG in the Champions League, but it's not impossible while they're still in the competition. So I think it would be interesting to know exactly sort of what made Kylian Mbappe certain that this was the absolute moment that he wanted to take to move on and write the next chapter in his career. I'd also like to get his perspective on how he sees the development of Ligue 1 in the next couple of years now that he moves away, whether he feels like there's been too much pressure on him because of the league, or whether he feels there's enough talent now in the league and in PSG. Because let's not forget, when you look at PSG, there are the stars of tomorrow already in place. You have Warren Zaïre-Emery in midfield. You have Bradley Barcola in attack. Two very, very talented young French players who I think we're going to see a lot more of in the next couple of years. Obviously, first of all, at the Olympics, possibly the Euros as well this summer, but in the future international setup for Les Bleus as well. So I think those would be the main topics I'd like to pick Mbappe's brains about.
You are living in Paris for quite a few years. You are following very closely PSG. I know that you have good contacts over there, that you have deep knowledge about the club. Can you tell me and compare Mbappe, Messi, Cavani, Di Maria, Buffon, how you managed to work with them? Can you tell me something about these star players in the world of football, in the history of the football? How it was for you? Can you tell me something about those guys?
I mean, obviously, PSG have had a selection of some of the top names in football over the years playing for the team. I mean, if I go right back to the very beginning of the Qatari project in Paris, you had the likes of Javier Pastore coming in. I got to know Gregory Van der Wiel a little bit away from the pitch as well. You had some very interesting characters coming in at a really interesting time for PSG, because PSG had to educate a lot of these players about the club's history, because many people just assumed that, as Zlatan said himself, PSG didn't exist before he arrived. Well, PSG did exist before he arrived and had quite a nice sort of football romantic history before. But obviously they enjoyed unprecedented success, once some of the star names started to come in. I do still feel like PSG's project hasn't quite been the same since the era of Zlatan, of Maxwell, of Thiago Motta, Blaise Matuidi, when a very young Marco Verratti was coming through in the midfield, when there's Thiago Silva in the defense, Cavani in attack, obviously. I think that team had stronger characters than the one we see today. I think Mbappe would have been a good addition to that team, perhaps even would have made the difference at certain moments, because we know that PSG team had its glass ceiling was the quarterfinals of the Champions League. It would regularly reach that point of the competition, but then couldn't go any further. We've seen at times since then, with the addition of really, really big star names like Neymar, that PSG were able to have the individual quality to make a difference in those games, and they did go to a Champions League final and the following year's semi-final as well. But overall, there's been something missing, and I think you now almost need to combine those two elements. And if PSG can get the chemistry right, maybe looking at more of a domestic core of players, then perhaps their moment of glory will be at some point in the next couple of years. I don't think it's totally impossible for PSG, but I think history has told us they had to take a different approach, and that's what we see being put into place now. The other thing that I would say that's changed a lot since my time starting covering PSG is this is the most French that the playing staff, the players have felt in my entire time here. There's always been a couple of French players, but right now you have a handful of really established, top French international players playing for PSG, not just the likes of Mbappe, but the likes of Dembele as well. I mentioned Barcola, I mentioned Zaïre-Emery, but you've also got Lucas Hernandez as well. So to have names like that, I think is a big statement from PSG's Qatari owners, and also a big change in direction as well. So I'm curious to see how it plays out in the future. Obviously, we know that it's most likely to be without Kylian Mbappe now, but I do feel like the seeds have been put into the ground, so to speak, so that PSG can perhaps benefit from the harvest of tomorrow.
Who was the biggest star and who audience liked the most?
You know what? I'm going to go for Zlatan. And I say Zlatan because for me, Zlatan signing for PSG was a real moment that made everyone sit up and say, we have to take PSG seriously now. This is a really big project. It's going to attract the biggest names. But I also say Zlatan because I feel like his personality was the right match with PSG at the right time. I feel a bit not disappointed, but I feel like the only thing that was missing from Zlatan's story in history was sort of a true love element between the player and the fans. I think Zlatan spent so much time sort of challenging PSG's history and French football that the bond that he should have had with the fans. I mean, look at the relationship that Cavani enjoyed with the same supporters. I feel like given Zlatan's achievements with PSG, he merited having that same sort of legendary status. But I feel that he will only ever sort of really be at an iconic level with PSG because there was not always that love between Zlatan and the PSG fans. But in terms of the player who made the biggest impact, I think for me, I would say Zlatan just ahead of Mbappe. But you know, Neymar had his moments as well. It should really have been Neymar's title, but unfortunately, as we know, the PSG years did not go according to plan for Neymar, nor for PSG.
Have you seen Messi in person? Have you managed to speak with him a little bit, or David Beckham, or someone of those guys? Can you tell us a few things about them?
David Beckham, yes. I was a very young journalist at that point, so seeing somebody like David Beckham in press conferences and in the mix zone after games was quite surreal. Especially some of the journalists that he built up relationships with over time. Messi, no, very very difficult to get in touch with sort of anybody even close to Messi, let alone Messi himself. You know, and I think that is also a reflection of the fact that, you know, PSG's biggest stars were quite inaccessible, certainly over the last couple of years when the relationship between Neymar and Messi and the fans was becoming quite strained. I think Messi is perhaps maybe the most underwhelming experience of mine covering PSG, not because of Messi the person. There were still some moments of absolute brilliance and magic, don't get me wrong, but I think it very much felt like Messi was a bit of an unnecessary addition to PSG's team, and that it actually made the team more unbalanced. I think if PSG had concentrated on the Neymar and Mbappe dynamic, and if they managed to keep Neymar fit, which obviously was an entirely different challenge, PSG perhaps could have done something a bit better than what they managed to achieve in the couple of years that Messi was there. But for me, just my personal opinion, the entire experience of PSG and Messi felt very forced. But one thing that I will add sort of on some of those star names is it's not always the biggest star names that sort of make the biggest impression on you at a personal level. It's easier to sometimes build up a rapport with somebody who is not maybe one of the star names in the team. And there are some very, very humble guys who have come through, you know, with PSG over the years. And I think, you know, it's important to emphasize that the PSG are not, you know, it's not always been just a group of individual players. There have been some guys who've been very committed to the team, to the collective. And that hasn't always sort of been portrayed in the public.
Last question about PSG and Mbappe. Is Mbappe's mother the most influential person around him?
She is definitely one of the two most influential people around him. And yes, I think in terms of his future, making a decision and having the right offers and options in front of him, yes, she's the most influential person.
I want to ask you about one other football player, Nemanja Matic, who took my impression, took French league under his wing, and he made a really good, how should I say, not to repeat impression word. He did good. Of course, there were some strange things when he moved from one club to another, but I saw that both clubs were on the rising curve when he arrived, now in Lyon. What is your impression? What do people think about Matic in France right now?
I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do since joining Lyon. I share your opinion. I think it was a bit strange, the move between Rennes and Lyon. But what I would say is, unfortunately for Matic, it didn't work out between Rennes and Bruno Genesio, who was the coach at the time that Matic joined. Obviously, they're in improving form now under Julien Stéphan, who's returned, but obviously wasn't coach when Matic signed up. But I think the thing that maybe disappointed Matic the most was that Rennes were expecting to be potentially title challengers with PSG this season to try and not only qualify for the Champions League, but to really, try to push hard to be in the top three. Maybe they will finish in that position by the end of the season because of the recovery in form at the moment. But at the time that Matic decided that it wasn't working for him, Rennes were pretty far down the league and nowhere near where they were supposed to be. So I can understand from his point of view that it was not the project that he signed up for. And in going to Lyon, yes, he took a risk going to a club that was further down the standings, but he knows that he will be absolutely crucial to what Lyon tried to do between now and the end of the season. And I was confident enough about this move to actually say a couple of weeks ago that I think it's one of the best moves of the January transfer window, because Matic brings everything that Lyon need at this moment in time: true leadership, a real experience, and somebody who can really make his presence felt in the midfield, but also in the dressing room as well. Somebody who, is a real, true authority in the world of football. But also, it's the kind of challenge I think that Matic needs as well, because, I think if one thing should be said about Rennes, it's quite easy for a lot of people to get into a comfort zone. And when things are going badly, it's difficult for them to react. That's maybe what we saw under Genesio before the coaching change was made. But I think this current situation, where there's a need to win every game, to pick up all the different points in order for Lyon to have the best chance of survival, I think that is the perfect scenario for Matic at this point in his career. I've seen a couple of his interviews since he's joined the club as well, and he's talked a lot about how people have asked him, maybe how he stays motivated at this point in his career, having done so much, having played for so long. And basically, he was talking about how until the day that he feels like he doesn't have any more motivation anymore, or feels like physically it's too much, he is happy to play on and to bring what he can to whichever club that he's playing for. And I think, this season, in terms of staying in Ligue 1, Lyon definitely need him. But in terms of next season as well, you would imagine they will want to try and challenge to qualify for Europe. I think that Matic is, the right person to have in that kind of ambitious squad as well.
Speaking about football, one question about football and another about sport in general. Tell me, you are from England, living in France. You're following football closely. What do you think England-Serbia at the Euro later this year?
Really excited about it. There's a couple of games in the group stage that I'm already really looking forward to. There's Italy, Spain, there's France, Netherlands as well. So England, Serbia definitely sort of up there in the top three matches that I'm looking forward to immediately in the Euros. I think the thing with the Serbian national team, it's never been a question of talent, in terms of actual just pure potential and ability. Serbia are always up there ranking very high. It's just a question of sort of whether the right sort of chemistry, mentality, and tactical setup can be put in place. And I think if that is the case, then they could be very tricky opponents for England. Obviously, sort of with my journalistic hat on, I spend more time following the French national team, but I do still keep an eye on England, and I do want England to do as well as possible. And I think they're in a challenging group, and I think that Serbia could be difficult opponents for them if they don't take them seriously.
You think that England is one of the favorites to win the Euro?
Some people would say they're favorites. I wouldn't necessarily rank them among the favorites.
And the last topic and last thing, you're in Paris, Jonathan. How many people has asked you to sleep over during the Olympic Games in your apartment?
Well, the waiting list for space in my guest room is extremely long. It's already more than one page of paper, so I expect it's going to grow again in the next couple of months. But no, it's nice to see so much excitement as well for an event that's happening in Paris. Obviously, the last one that people were really getting excited about, the Champions League final, didn't go well at all. So I'm really hoping that France shows a much better image of itself than they did last time. But I think as well, it's really historic having the Olympics coming back to Paris, and sort of in one of my other positions away from being a journalist, I'm actually a board member at a semi-professional club in the fourth tier of France, and our home stadium is the Yves du Manoir Stadium in Colombes. It will be renovated to be a hockey stadium for the Olympics, and then it will be turned into a football and rugby pitch in the legacy project after the Olympics. So the impact that the Olympics is going to have on a lot of different things in Paris, not just my football club, is one that I'm really looking forward to seeing. But no, it's going to be very exciting, and I think specific to football, which obviously will still be my main point of interest at the Olympics, there's some really interesting teams that will be coming to this one, and I think we'll see a really good festival of sport.
Okay, now the most important question. Tell me the prices in Paris right now. Will we have enough money to buy a coffee or a glass of wine? And how do you feel? What about accommodation, and what about organization, and what about the prices?
Sure. I mean, obviously the prices are sky high. We know that prices of accommodation are going to rocket in the coming months in the build up to the tournament. There's also other aspects to consider as well. I think you'll be okay. You'll still be able to afford your coffee or your glass of wine. The public transport, on the other hand, I think might be a bit of a challenge. I think we're going to be walking to a lot of places, but not just in terms of the amount of people using the public transport, but the actual pricing of the tickets during the Olympics. It is due to rise for non-residents. So I guess I should be grateful that I am qualified as a resident here in Paris and won't have to pay extra for that. But it's going to be interesting to see how Paris deals with the challenge overall. And obviously, Paris is a city that's expensive on any given day, let alone when the Olympics come to town.
Are the Parisians excited or worried?
Depends on which day you ask them. Most Parisians, I think, are looking forward to it and having the event. A lot of Parisians are also wary that it's going to be extremely busy, unusually so actually for the time of year, because normally a lot of people are away in August. So I think it's going to balance out in the end.
Many thanks for your time, and hope to see you very soon. Maybe I will come at Paris even before the Olympics. So the coffee is on me, because the last time we went to some very nice restaurant near Roland Garros, if you remember. And hope that the organization will be much better, because I felt really bad after the Champions League final. You are fully aware about it, but I managed to get safely, because this is the beautiful city, and I really hope everything will be well, and hope to see you again, and hope to speak about many topics with you soon.
I look forward to it, my friend, and it's always a pleasure to catch up with you when you're in Paris. I know how much you love Roland Garros, so I'm very much keeping my schedule clear for those days, and looking forward to another bite to eat and a drink with you in Paris soon. But no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on, and yeah, for anyone else who wants to sort of follow a bit of my work or see what I'm talking about at this moment in time, best place to follow me is on Twitter/X at JON_Legosip, and hopefully have a few more people following my work there.
I will strongly recommend that, because this is how we met, me following you at Twitter account. Hope to see you. Hope to see you in Belgrade as well, and have a really successful and good year. And we are in touch about everything. Say hello to Paris, and we are in touch. Thanks, many thanks, Jonathan, for your time.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I enjoyed my experience last time in Belgrade so much that I absolutely want to come back, whether it's football related or not. I had a
Great.
great time covering Red Star PSG a couple of years ago. So thanks for having me on, my friend. Always a pleasure, and speak soon.
In touch, man. In touch, mate. Bye. Thanks. Bio je to razgovor sa Jonathanom Johnsonom, čovekom koji prati fudbal, čovekom koji je vrlo dobro upoznat sa situacijom u Paris Saint-Germainu, u svetu fudbala, naravno živi u Parizu, pratit će olimpijske igre i eto mogli ste čujete od njega nekoliko stvari, naravno zahvalnost Vrnjanu na kafi ovoj koja je mnogo prijela i godila, a eto do sledeće prilike pozdrav, bit će mnogo zanimljivih intervjua, ne samo ovde u studiju, već i na nekim drugim poljima i u nekim drugim formatima. Hvala mnogo, pozdrav.